Hey everyone. Thank you for joining us on July 3rd. I'm a masochist. Chris is a masochist. We should be resting. Chris is outside. It's beautiful weather. He's we're in the DMV. I just worked out after being nonstop, back to back to back to back, talking to Joanne Reed, Mike, Lev Parnas, Danielle Moody. I came back for a run. I'm like, I'll sit down, I'll have my chai, and I'll relax. And then, the itch, though, Chris, the itch inside me as we're fighting fascism, I can't help it. I get a restlessness. I get upset. There's a righteous rage in me that builds, and I feel like people still aren't connecting the dots. People still aren't being outraged enough. And then right on cue, the Supreme Court gives this just atrocious decision with an exquisite Sotomayor dissent, which basically, folks, allows Donald Trump to deport 8 immigrants without due process to South Sudan. I said, you
Yeah.
heard me correctly. South Sudan, where they will die. Forget it. El Salvador, at least you get there pretty quickly. South Sudan, right, without due process, and 8 immigrants who aren't even from South Sudan being now sent to their death without oversight to a country they've never visited. And South Sudan is going to get a little bit of money, just like Bukele of El Salvador gets a little bit of money, like DeSantis gets a little bit of money. And this is all happening on the heels of this horrific bill, which, in addition to gutting Medicaid, gives $175 billion to ICE, folks, something I wish Democrats would have talked about until today. $175 billion to ICE. ICE is now has more money than the FBI and the Bureau of Prisons and all these organizations combined. And ICE is being unleashed against LA. And Donald Trump opened the Alcatraz concentration camp. And Chris, he said he's open to stripping people of citizenship. So Chris is a fantastic follow. If you do not follow him on Blue Sky, please do. Chris Geidner, but he also is at www.lawdork.com. And he's an activist. And I saw his post dissecting this, and I'm like, let me on a lark. Just Blue Sky message him. I followed Chris. I've never talked to him before, and he immediately responded, and he was such a mensch. He goes, I'm in the park. Let's do it. So I yield the floor to you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty right. This is a bad ruling. This is a case that's been going on for a while over what's called third country removal, which is it's a technical name, but basically what it means is it's not somebody's country of origin and it's not another country where they have legal status. And so it's a third country. But what that normally means versus what it means here is the Trump administration has been trying to send people to bad places. And obviously this started with the El Salvador and CCOT. But because of that, some people got a lawsuit going. It's called DVD versus DHS, not DVD versus VHS, which every time I post it, somebody on Blue Sky is like, blah, blah, blah. But what happened is the judge, Brian Murphy in Massachusetts, issued a preliminary injunction saying, like, in order to do this, and like this is so important because it's how narrow this actually was. In order to do this, in order to send people to these third countries, you need to let them know what the country is and give them like enough due process that they can raise claims of potential that like sending them there would violate the Convention Against Torture, things like that. Like very basic due
Bare minimum,
process.
the
Yeah.
lowest bar in
Like
hell.
he didn't say you can't do third country removals at all. It was nothing like that. Um, of course, DOJ didn't just appeal that and say they were mad. They initially tried to get around it by sending people to Guantanamo and then having DOD send them elsewhere. Um, and he immediately clarified the initial injunction and was like, no, um, that's not what an injunction means. That's not you're acting in concert with them. They were initially covered by the injunction, but just to make it perfectly clear, I'll clarify you can't do that. Then they started going to like dangerous countries. They tried to send people to Libya.
Mm.
Um, and the lawyers got in front of Judge Murphy early enough that they were able to stop it. Uh, then a couple of weeks later, they got this notice that people were being told they were going to be taken to South Sudan.
Civil war, by
And
the way, folks. Civil war in
yeah,
South Sudan.
well, both Libya and South Sudan are on the like do not travel list. They're like when you like look on the State Department, you get a red warning because of how dangerous they are. Americans aren't supposed to travel there. Um, and in South Sudan, we had even under Marco Rubio, we had pulled out non-essential personnel from South Sudan.
Yep.
And so Judge Murphy is like, wow, this seems awful. Issues another clarification, but then he goes a step further because it turns out the flight had taken off.
Of course.
And there were 7 or 8 people who they were trying to take to South Sudan. He issued an injunction. He said, "Whoa, stop it." The plane did, unlike the situation with the original Alien Enemies Act. This time he was specific enough. He said, "Anybody in your custody, don't leave them out of your custody."
Gotcha.
So he didn't say remember, Stephen Miller's like genius the first time around was, well, they're
Yep.
outside of US custody or outside of US jurisdiction. So you can't order the plane to turn around. So he didn't order the plane to turn around. He said, if they're in your custody, you can't take them out of your custody. So what they did was they landed at the US military base in Djibouti. Again, not a safe place, but it's only an orange country. It's not a red country. And the 8 people have been there since. DOJ goes up to the Supreme Court, and a couple weeks ago, the Supreme Court 6-3 said, we're putting your injunction on hold while it's appealed, which essentially means for now, they
Yep.
can do these third country removals without due process. Murphy quickly responded and said, well, I had issued a remedy for their non-compliance with the injunction, saying you have to give due process to those 8 people who are now in Djibouti.
Mm.
Um, and there were hearings. They talked about like, well, like he didn't make them bring them back. He said, if you can come up with a way of giving them due process from Djibouti, I won't make you bring them back while you're giving them the due process.
Right.
If they win in that convention against torture process, I will say you need to bring them back. But for now, you can do it from Djibouti. So they started doing that, but they also appeal to the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court said today was once they put the injunction on stay, everything else that he was doing was essentially an effort to enforce that injunction. Now, he had made it clear that was not a clarification order. He had said this was a remedy for their noncompliance.
Yep.
So it was essentially a remedy akin to contempt. It was a pre-contempt order. But today, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And this time, Justice Kagan concurred with that decision. She said, I disagreed originally with staying the injunction, but I do agree that once the injunction was stayed, Judge Murphy couldn't do what he did. Justice Sotomayor and joined by Justice Justice Sotomayor joined by Justice Jackson was
Jack.
not having this.
Nope.
She made it clear. She said, like, what the government wants to do concretely is send the 8 non-citizens it illegally removed from the United States from Djibouti to South Sudan, where they will be turned over to the local authorities without regard for the likelihood that they will face torture or death.
Yep.
That is what happened. 7 justices issued an order today knowing that that is what is likely to happen, and at the very least, that that is what the government wants to do.
That was a
And
sorry. Continue, Chris.
yeah, no, I mean, step in.
No, that was a masterful breakdown. I really appreciate it as a recovering attorney. Thank you for breaking it down for the folks who aren't attorneys and connecting the dots. And also, district judges in the past 2 weeks have also now lost their powers. People haven't realized that district judges actually have been doing their job. Donald Trump, the administration, the Trump regime, as of last week, had lost like 90% of their cases thanks to district judges actually stepping in and enforcing the law.
Yeah.
But can you tell people real quick how they just lost their teeth as well?
Yeah, well, this is sort of step 2 after last Friday when the big ruling that was like about the birthright citizenship executive order, but was actually the decision from Justice Barrett was ending nationwide injunctions, universal injunctions, they called it. And what again in dissents from Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson, Justice Kagan was with them. What Justice Sotomayor said for all 3 of them was like, that's not how it works. There is a long history. You're conflating essentially the fact that judges back in the day weren't issuing nationwide injunctions for a decision that they didn't have the authority to do so. And so now that tool has been taken out of their toolkit. And now what happened tonight was an additional tool, basically, that they expanded the restrictions on what judges could do with a case once they have once a higher court stays their injunction. This most notably is that issue with the original Alien Enemies Act case
Yep.
and those March 15th flights that took off after the hearing on class certification had started before Judge Boasberg and landed after he had issued his injunction, his temporary restraining order for the whole class in that case. In that case, there is a contempt finding. And it was notable that in today's order, there was this little side note going on that Justice Sotomayor dropped a footnote. To be clear, even the majority today does not dispute that violations of an order are punishable as criminal contempt, even though the order is set aside on appeal. Although she didn't cite anything to JGG, which is the name of the original Alien Enemies Act case, that is clearly what that was about. That is currently the ability of Judge Boasberg to issue a contempt order in that case is currently on appeal before the DC Circuit. And that footnote was all about that appeal. It's
Absolutely.
footnote 1 in Justice Sotomayor's dissent today.
And did
That
it?
is very clearly what it was about. But
Yeah, go ahead. Go
nonetheless,
ahead.
to answer
Go ahead.
your question, like the broader ability of district court judges to maintain authority over their orders that they had originally issued and to issue remedial orders before contempt. Essentially, what the court did today was said, you can go all the way and try to hold people in contempt. But if you try to take a more reasoned, narrow, piecemeal, incremental step, merely trying to issue an order for noncompliance, you won't be able to do that, and you basically have to go all the way to contempt, which is the higher standard.
And, and,
But the
and it favors and it makes it more difficult than to meet that standard for the judges, right? And to
Mhm.
hold these bad faith actors accountable.
Yeah, you have to basically hope for appeals courts to do the work, which is, I imagine you were referring to the chart that we've all seen, that like the win at the district court level is really beautiful, and then you get to the appeals court, and it there's a little more Trump win, and then you get to the Supreme Court, and it flips from the district court.
And what's also happening, folks, is if you've been paying attention, the Supreme Court, which I think is a completely, it was the first time I'm talking to Chris, I think it's a completely compromised and corrupt institution. I've been saying it for a while. I believe there should be reform. I think there should be expansion of the court. But the Supreme Court is basically rubber stamping Donald Trump. Give him the get out of jail free card last year, absolute immunity for acts done within his scope of the presidency. Now essentially has neutered district judges and their ability to hold them, his regime accountable. Also, is going through the shadow dockets, emergency dockets, right? And Donald Trump's creating national emergencies when there are no national emergencies, right? That's why they're invoking the Alien
Yep.
Enemies Act, which was only invoked 4 times before during wartime. And Stephen Miller, who is the main architect behind all of this, folks, Stephen Miller and the oligarchy, white supremacy and the oligarchy. That's what people don't realize,
Yep.
right? It's the grift and racism. Is he says we're under invasion. So you'll all be thinking, invasion? Holy shit. Who's invading us? To him, it's immigrants. And so he says,
It's
listen,
migration. Yeah,
migration,
migration
invasion, it's
counts.
black people,
If
brown people, immigrants. And that's why the president has to do this. Strong border, strong border. And then if it wasn't clear enough, folks, this week, two things happened, Chris. While this is happening, number one, Donald Trump, somehow the Trump regime finds money to build a concentration camp in the middle of a hurricane zone in Florida surrounded by alligators. They happen to do that in 8 days, Chris. Can't create hospitals, can create that. And a couple of days later, they passed this bill that just got passed today, a disastrous bill that will kill Americans that gives $175 billion to ICE. ICE now in the United States of America has a bigger budget than some countries spend on their entire militaries. There'll be 10,000 agents, more concentration camps, more prisons. Can you connect the dots as to what's happening on the immigration front, sending people to Sudan and El Salvador, and the ruling today?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing to your point about the shadow docket, um, Justice Sotomayor actually talked about that. She said today's order clarifies only one thing: other litigants must follow the rules, but the administration has the Supreme Court on speed dial.
Woo!
Yeah.
Whoa, that's guys.
Um,
For those who don't follow, they rarely get that spicy. That's
yeah.
spicy.
And then she also, I mean, she really went after her colleagues as well. She said the court's continued refusal to justify its extraordinary decisions in this case, this DVD third country removal case, even as it faults lower courts for failing to properly divine their import, is indefensible.
Good for her. Good for her.
And so where does that connect? Where it connects is what we see on the ground. Where it connects is how, when these expansive powers are being implemented, who will provide the guardrails? And I wrote about this a few weeks ago, and I'm regretful to say that we just get more and more examples of it every day.
It's the
But
world's
that,
worst. I
like,
told you so.
this is not what the founders thought would happen. And the reason isn't because they thought they had devised like this beautiful system that everybody would love, democracy, and this republic that we were creating. No, it was the fact that they knew that they were talking about men. They knew that men are awful. And they knew that the best way of dealing with men was splitting up the power so that a bunch of people would have their egos preventing other people from taking too much control. That's what separation of powers is all about. That's what having the Supreme Court, having the president, and having the Speaker of the House and the president of the Senate is all about. It's about the fact that, well, there's no way that the Speaker of the House would ever let the president just ignore appropriations passed by Congress. There's no way that the Supreme Court would ever let the president just ignore precedent of the court, because it would be their own power that would be minimized time and time again. Like, that's what the founders didn't expect that's happening here. And that's what happened with this bill. You had like what's the Looney Tunes right wing coalition, the it was the Tea
Mega first.
Party. What's it
Yeah,
called
yeah, yeah.
now?
Freedom Caucus.
Whatever, the Freedom Caucus, the House Freedom Caucus, like, basically went from we will do nothing to support this bill to like, well, it's fine, in like 2 days,
Yep.
because they were afraid of getting primaried, even though these are like the Looney Tune of the Looney Tune. Like, what was it? I think The Hill reported that like Thomas Massey, who was like one of the key opponents of the bill, like basically said like, I'll go along with it if Trump promises to stop like making fun of me on social media. Like, what is this?
It's fascism. I think it's fascism. And, I said this earlier today, and I want your thoughts on it. Now that Donald Trump has his own personal militia, his own Gestapo, his own brown shirts in the form of ICE, which got $175 billion infusion and is going to go to about 10,000 agents, who's going to stop him, Chris? Who's going to
Yeah,
stop ICE?
I mean, ICE is going to be like largely unstoppable. It is going to be questions about whether or not individuals, whether or not governors. I mean, this is going to be so. In addition to separation of powers this way, like the other protection that the founders thought was states aren't giving up their sovereignty to join this union. And so we have a system that is called dual sovereignty. And the states still have independent freedoms, and they are going to have to fight back. And we've seen a little bit of how that's going in LA, and that's not altogether reassuring, because obviously California is going to be one of the strongest states.
A-
Um,
and you're seeing that, folks, look at it. Who has ICE terrorized publicly? They went after Senator Padilla. They went
yeah,
after Mayor Baraka in New Jersey. They pointed guns at Maxine Waters. They went after this judge in Wisconsin, and now she's been indicted. They've gone after another individual in New Jersey. That person's been indicted. They went after Nadler's aides, and so if they can go after all these elected officials, and earlier this week when Donald Trump was promoting the alligator concentration camp and smearing Mamdani,
yeah.
they asked him, "Well, what happened?" Well, Mamdani said that he's not going to allow ICE to come and terrorize immigrants, and he said, "We'll just arrest him." So if ICE can do this, and he can unleash ICE as his own personal Gestapo against elected officials, what's going to happen to the rest of us, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's going this is a very, very bad bill. And you've got, I mean, it seems like it's a side issue, and it's been very hard to get people to care about. But something else happened today. The Justice Department released FOIA letters that are the letters that Pam Bondi sent to Apple and Amazon and T-Mobile and Google, explaining to them that basically this why they could keep TikTok in the TikTok store, in their app stores, because if you remember the law, the TikTok ban wasn't actually a TikTok ban. It was a law that made it so that anybody who had it in their app stores would face like basically $1 billion fines if they if it was still owned by a foreign controlled company. And essentially there was one it was either a 75-day or 95-day delay that a president could implement if the president like could I don't know if he had to certify. If essentially if the president could say it's going to be sold, but I'm giving you an extra 90 days to sell it. When Donald Trump on January 20th gave his first TikTok order, like there was not even the sufficient circumstances to give that first delay because there was no sale in process at that point. He's now given 2 extensions of that. And Pam Bondi basically sent letters to these people saying that we are forever going to disclaim the ability to bring any lawsuit against you because we are irrevocably relinquishing any claims that the United States has against you because Donald Trump has decided that this under Article 2 of the Constitution, he under national security in the context of foreign policy has decided that these extensions are allowed. That's absurd. That essentially, like, not only did she do that, which is like a bullshit letter, but like the general counsels of Google and Apple said, sure, that's enough. You can keep it in the store. And I mean, I said it, and I don't know if it's overstating it, but I really don't think it is. It is like if this is in effect, if that's real, then the constitutional system that has been in place for more than 200 years is no longer in effect because that was a law that was passed by Congress, signed by the president, President Biden, and there was a lawsuit that went before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unanimously upheld the law against that challenge. And so if all 3 branches can have passed the law in 2023 or 2024, and in 2025, Donald Trump can unilaterally say, nope, I don't think we need to enforce that law. And the attorney general can send a letter to people saying, I am for all time revoking the U.S.'s ability to take action against you. That is the end of our constitutional system. There is no constitutional system.
And right now, folks, I don't think you're being hyperbolic. I've used the F word fascism. I've used the W word white supremacy. I've used the A word authoritarianism. What you've seen is that these branches, the separation of powers that existed precisely for the reason that you mentioned, have voluntarily neutered themselves for Donald Trump.
Yeah,
The House, the Senate,
exactly.
the Supreme Court, and I would say the fourth estate, the corporate media. And we have voluntarily, what I kept saying is the world's worst, I told you so. And I've been saying this for a couple of years, is that these corporations will bring out the red carpet for fascists. Just because if you study history, that's what happened during Nazi Germany. All the corporate folks were like, we'll make some money off this. And when the war crimes were actually, prosecuted, excuse me, some of those industrialists ended up where? Yep. You betcha, right? Those industrialists were right there with the Nazis because they were complicit in the regime, right?
Yeah.
So we have complicity, we have fecklessness, we have failed leadership. The final question I'll ask you, Chris, is thanks so much for those 800 people who have joined. We've been talking about 30 minutes. We're going to publish it in 30 minutes or so, but I was supposed to talk to Chris for 10 minutes, and he's like, I'm in the park. I'll get my computer out. Because we have an opposition party. This is what we got, the Democrats.
Right.
How should the Democrats be responding to this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be as aggressive. I mean, we've seen actions that are up to the moment. It needs to be as aggressive as Gavin Newsom was the day that he said he was going to oppose it, and that 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 Donald Trump or whoever had threatened to put him in jail can arrest him. It needs to be as careful and aggressive as these district judges are being. I mean, like it's important to understand why they are doing as well as they're doing with at least the appeals courts. Like, I mean, we had like, I mean, when you look at like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, like that was a situation that Judge Wilkinson, J. Harvey Wilkinson, a Reagan appointee, one of like when I was going to law school, one of the two key conservative judges on the Fourth Circuit, which at that time had the reputation of what the Fifth Circuit does now. And the two judges, and I think that this is important for history to understand, were Judge Wilkinson, who joined the Democratic appointees initially in upholding the order to bring from Judge Zenas to bring Abrego Garcia back. But then when the Trump administration was messing around after the Supreme Court order and tried to fuck with the courts, Wilkinson then wrote the next opinion when it came up, and he compared what Trump was doing to the treatment of Eisenhower enforcing Brown versus Board of Education, basically as this is actually what you're supposed to do when presidents have difficult moments. You enforce court orders. So those are examples, and it should be noted the second person who was that team of conservative far right judges in the 90s and early 2000s who were leading conservative thought was Judge Ludig, who we all now know as the retired judge who testified before the January 6th committee, and we now see on Substack, he, I think, was on a video today saying that John Roberts is his friend and John Roberts is acceding to the end of the rule of law right now.
And under his tenure and his leadership has completely compromised the integrity and reputation of the Supreme Court. And the fact
And
that
so
Justice
we
Ludig,
need to stand up like they're doing. These are people who we would not have expected to do so. And then on the other end of the scale, we need to be protecting our neighbors. We need to actually be aware of what's going on. Like just because you aren't a brown person, aren't a trans person, aren't the people right at the front of these attacks, you're able to be there for the people who are being attacked. You are able to be there when look at what some of the restaurants in DC did. The first time when they started to send out ICE to restaurants to do random checks where they were probably going to try to arrest people, they said, do you have a warrant? And shut the door, said, go away. You're not coming in. And they stopped that after a few days because they realized it wasn't going to work here. They there certainly will come times when that is what you need to do if you can.
I believe it's a 10 toes down moment. I believe everyone has a role to play. I believe people need to be using the language to understand the moment that we're dealing with a fascist regime. I think people need to get rid of the antiquated ways of talking when it comes to civility and understand the moment. I think this week in particular, just this entire past week, from last Friday to tomorrow, if folks were asleep, I give you the last week. Hell, I give you today. I give you today. Right? It's the world's worst. I told you so. I don't want any garlands. I just want you to wake up and realize what we're dealing with and how we have to figuratively and literally fight back. And I agree with you. It's the majority. The majority still has the power because the majority has the numbers. And the color that trumps the color white is still the color green. We have our dollars. We have our tongues, our communities, our alliances. When it came to LA, it's the grassroots that mobilized and is trying its best to protect its community from ICE. It forced the LA Dodgers to say no to ICE from coming to Dodger Stadium. LA Dodgers then to look good with the community, gave $1 million to immigrant rights. because these law firms who bent the knee like cowards, and I hope they're humiliated forever,
Yeah.
like Paul Weiss, because of the pressure against them, now corporations are walking away from them because they realize associating them was bad. Costco's membership went up. Target's membership went down. This is how we can exert power. At the very end, I think what we can do, folks, is each and every single time you resist, it's like throwing sand in the gears, right? It's like just
Yes.
making it slower. If the fascist machine is going 30 miles per hour, now you've made it go 5 miles per hour, right?
And
And eventually,
that's also when people are like, well, a district court injunction, it's just going to be overturned when it gets to the Supreme Court. Well, even with their speed dial to the Supreme Court, the Judge Murphy's original temporary restraining order in this case, I think, was back in March.
yeah.
And it wasn't until June that the Supreme Court stayed it, and it wasn't until today that we got this ruling. And time is a win when
Yep.
you're fighting a fascist regime.
And even
Time
lawyers
is a win.
and lawyers know this. Delay, 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 right? Exhaust them, make them tap out, confuse them. Folks,
Yeah,
they're incompetent. Look, they're cruel. And they're very deliberate about what they want to do through Project 2025, but they're also incompetent. We're being run by the dumbest people. We're getting killed by the dumbest people on earth. I want to give a quick story that came out yesterday on Notice that Donald Trump trying to whip the votes. According to three people who were in the room, he said, "Whatever you do, make sure you don't go after Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security." And then three Republicans are like, "This bill does that."
but
Yeah, he doesn't
but
even
we
know what's in
are.
the bill. And what we've also seen in those who watch the left hook, no, I love this meme. Ken Watanabe's character from Godzilla,
Yeah,
let them fight. Fascists come after everyone. So all the cracks, all the leaks, it adds up, folks. I know people want you know what people want, Chris, is they want the Avengers to come and magically save the day. It's not going to work that way. This is a
no.
generational fight. It's a long walk. We're talking about death by 1,000 cuts. Each person that resists is a cut, 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 and it adds up. So this is why I think anything and everything that we do, if you thought we were being hyperbolic, I give you today. Forget the last week. Just look at today, folks. And I want
And
to, like, sorry, go ahead,
I'll
Chris.
I'll give you one positive note to end on, since I talked about 8 bad rulings.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there overnight, Judge John Bates, who was a George W. Bush appointee, issued a ruling. If you remember back, it feels like it was 8 years ago. But on January 31st, remember that Friday at 5 p.m. when a bunch of websites went down? Any website that mentioned trans people like
Yeah.
disappeared off the internet. The government website. Um, a group, Doctors for America, had filed a lawsuit, and they have been fighting that lawsuit. They had got an original temporary restraining order that brought back a few of the websites, but last night, after midnight, it was posted online on Pacer. It was dated yesterday, but it was online on Thursday. He issued a ruling that vacated the OMB memo that was implementing this Defending Women order,
Mm.
and the HHS memo that was implementing the order. And in while he sent those back to the agencies and said, figure out what you want to do, in the interim, all of those websites need to be put back online that were taken down by HHS. Because of those memos. And because of that, what that means is that even if they go back down in a month because HHS finds a way to site by site take them down, doctors, nonprofits, organizations will be able to download all the data and keep it so that we have it.
I mean, that's the win, folks. We have to
That's a
think
win.
outside the box and we have to improvise and we have to also, and I so appreciate you ending on the win, we have to also not give in to apathy and cynicism because it's cheap and lazy. And we have to remain hopeful. And as I always say, hope, it's not just an inshallah, right? It's optimism with a plan. To quote Rogue One, rebellions are built on hope. And this is
Yep.
a long walk, folks. It's a long walk. So anyone and everyone, I believe, has a superpower, right? If you're a lawyer, if you're a teacher, if you're a contributor, a writer, everyone has to say something and do something. And even when, Chris, a lot of people ask me, I travel, I give speeches, like a lot of these questions I get asked is, I'm just an average American. What can I do? I'm nobody. And I always tell people, I'm nobody too. Congratulations. We're all
Yeah.
nobody. But we're all somebody's to someone. And I said, even in your home, the way you model yourself is a resistance. The way you model your language, the way you raise your children, the ways you show up in your church, in your community, in your synagogue, the running for city council, running for office, running for the school board, right?
Forget even running. I mean, like, yes, running's important, but just attending. Like, being there changes behavior.
And the numbers, and that's how they bully us. The way MAGAs have been able to do this is city council by city council, school board by school board, district by
Yep.
district. They went, a few of them were super loud. They showed up, we seated the grounds, and they bullied everyone else. But when we showed up, we have the numbers, we shut them down. So this is what we're gonna have to do, man. It's gonna be 10 toes down, 10 fingers down. Uh, Full court press from here on out. Thank you, Chris. First time talking. I hope you can come back anytime.
Definitely.
The community love you. For the nearly 1,000 people watching, we're going to have this up in an hour. Chris really connected the dots about how we got to this horrific ruling where the Supreme Court sided again with the Trump administration and has ordered 8 immigrants to basically be tortured to death in South Sudan, and how it's connected to the horrific billionaire bill that gives $175 billion to ICE and is going to unleash chaos and terror against not just brown folks. They're coming after everyone, folks. Fascists come after everyone. Um, Chris, before I let you go, shamelessly promote yourself, sir. How can people find you and support you?
Yes. Uh, Find me at LawDork. That's where all of my writing is on Substack. And my main social media outside of LawDork is Blue Sky, and I'm Chris Geidner there. But you can pretty much find me anywhere, any of the social media under Chris Geidner, and on most of them also as LawDork News.
That was fantastic, Chris. And this is The Left Hook. I am a fool, but I'm not an idiot. I have kept everything without a paywall. Everything is for free, much to the sadness of my immigrant parents. But I believe citizens should be informed during the rise of fascism. However, like Blanche Dubois, I depend on the kindness of strangers. If you have a few bucks, become a subscriber. If you don't, I know times are rough. At least subscribe and share the content, and subscribe to Chris's Substack. And at the very least, spread the good word, folks. We need people informed. Until next time, I will try to take tomorrow. Actually, no, I'm such a masochist. I'm talking to Glenn Kirshner tomorrow at 1 p.m. But for everyone else, for the love of God, don't be like me and Chris. Take the day off.
Yes.
Enjoy your families. We need joyful warriors. It's going to be a long walk. Heal. Eat whatever you want to eat. Spend time with your family. Go see fireworks. Go to the pool. Be kind to each other. Continue being empathetic. And please, oh please, don't be a fascist. Chris, thanks so much, buddy.
Thank you.